I bet most of you still have a bottle of sanitizer sitting in the kitchen or bathroom. It's become a habit, a little squeeze before cooking, after shopping, or when relatives visit. We trust it to guard us from the invisible world our hands touch each day. Door handles, cart screens, each carrying more bacteria than we'd ever imagine. But here's the bitter truth. Sometimes the harm doesn't come from what we touch outside, but from what we've been rubbing into our own skin. Behind the clean scent and crystal gel, many sanitizers hide fuel-grade alcohols, harsh residues, or bacteria that slipped past factory checks. Some bottles were even recalled after hospital-grade contaminants were found. So what do we really choose? And what should we quietly put away? In this video, we'll uncover 5 hand sanitizer brands to avoid at all costs, and 2 that are actually safe to use. Look around your counter. You may want to reconsider what's sitting there. Number 1. Dermarite. In August 2025, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration issued a nationwide recall for Dermarite's Gel Right and Handy Foam sanitizers. The reason wasn't a missing label or a small paperwork glitch. It was bacteria, the kind usually found only inside hospitals, not inside the very product meant to keep hospitals clean. The contaminant Burkholderia cepacia sounds technical until you know what it does. It's a resilient microbe that thrives in moist alcohol-based environments and can survive standard disinfection steps. In hospitals, it is notorious for causing infections in patients with asthma, cystic fibrosis, or weakened immune systems. When a company built on clinical-grade hygiene lets that same organism slip into its sanitizer line, something has gone deeply wrong. Inspectors traced the issue to multiple production lots distributed nationwide, nursing homes, pharmacies, long-term care suppliers. Thousands of bottles quietly moved through channels long before the recall notice reached the public. The brand looked spotless, transparent gel white blue labels, the professional aura that says sterile. Yet under the cap, it carried a microscopic hitchhiker that could trigger lung infection, sepsis, or slow-healing skin wounds. How does such contamination happen? Part of the answer lies in manufacturing shortcuts invisible to consumers. Hand sanitizers must be produced under the same sterile conditions as medical lotions. That means filtered air, clean water systems, and constant microbial testing. When the process slips a poorly cleaned mixing tank, a reused nozzle, or a batch stored too long, bacteria find a warm, nutrient-rich film to grow in. Once inside the production line, they're hard to eliminate. A single missed test can seed thousands of units. In plain terms, Dermarite's recall wasn't just about one bad day in a lab. It was a mirror reflecting a broader industry problem, the illusion that a medical label guarantees purity. The pandemic turned sanitizer into an everyday product, but oversight lagged behind demand. As factories rushed to fill orders, compliance corners sometimes got trimmed, and trust was quietly diluted. For ordinary consumers, the risk is uneven. Most healthy adults who use the affected batches will never notice a symptom. But for the elderly, for people recovering from surgery, for anyone whose immune defenses are thin, even mild exposure can turn into weeks of antibiotic treatment. That's why the recall triggered urgent notices to healthcare facilities. First, they understood the stakes instantly. More critically, Dermarite's case shows how safety isn't only about what's on the ingredient list. It's about how a product is made and where it's stored before reaching your hands. Moisture, time, and negligence can turn a disinfectant into a delivery system for infection. So what can you do? Start with the label. Look for lot numbers and manufacturing dates. If a sanitizer has no traceable batch code or the print is faded, that's not reliability, that's risk. Check the FDA's recall database before refilling dispensers or buying bulk packs online. The list updates every few weeks, and those few seconds of checking can save far greater trouble later. The larger lesson sits quietly behind the statistics. Cleanliness isn't a scent or a promise, it's a standard maintained every single day. Even a respected medical supplier can fall short when routine becomes an assumption. Before you reach for that familiar pump again, take one small pause. Sometimes the threat to your hands isn't what you touched, it's what you trusted. Number 2. Aruba Aloe. What if the scent you trusted most, that cool, clean whiff of aloe, was never meant for human skin at all? In April 2024, Aruba Aloe Balm NV recalled 40 lots of its hand sanitizers after U.S. regulators found traces of methanol denatured alcohol. On the label, it said 80% alcohol. But in the lab, that number told a darker story. Part of that alcohol wasn't ethanol, the safe kind we know from medicine cabinets. It was methanol, the one used in paint thinners, windshield fluid, and industrial fuel. The brand itself was beloved for decades, natural packaging, Caribbean imagery, a promise of pure aloe moisture. You'd see those amber bottles in airport shops, resort stores, even small pharmacies, green leaves curling across a beige label that whispered gentle. It felt honest. It looked safe. But purity is not a color, and nature, when processed without scrutiny, can become something else entirely. Methanol is deceptive by design. It evaporates, cleanly, smells almost identical to ethanol, and mixes easily with water and fragrance. To an untrained technician, it can pass every superficial test, except the right one. But once on the skin, methanol can seep through pores and enter the bloodstream. In high enough doses, it can attack the optic nerve, cause headaches, nausea, and in extreme cases, blindness. Inhaling the fumes or using it repeatedly on irritated hands amplifies the risk, especially for children and older adults. How did it slip in? Investigators traced the issue to supply substitution. When the global demand for ethanol spiked after the pandemic, some factories turned to cheaper industrial solvents to maintain output. Denatured alcohol was meant to discourage drinking, but not all formulas are equal. Some include methanol as the denaturant, and without strict separation lines and production, contamination is only a breath away. Aruba Aloe's recall revealed just how thin that margin had become. Chemically speaking, methanol's toxicity stems from how the body processes it. Enzymes convert it into formaldehyde and formic acid substances that interfere with cellular respiration. It doesn't take much. Even a few milliliters absorbed through the skin can cause metabolic acidosis, dizziness, or visual damage. Most people never connect those mild symptoms to a sanitizer. They just assume it's dry air or fatigue. But the mechanism is invisible, unfolding molecule by molecule. By the time the recall reached the public, thousands of units had already been sold across the Caribbean and the US mainland. Travelers carried them home in luggage unaware. That's the danger of trust. Once a product becomes part of our routine, we stop reading labels and start believing stories. Natural Pure Island made those words soothe us into silence. Experts say this wasn't an isolated mistake. It was a symptom of what chemists call spec drift, gradual deviation from certified ethanol standards due to supplier inconsistency and lax cross-testing. In other words, safety slipped not in a single act of negligence, but in a quiet chain of economic pressure where purity costs more than profit margins allow. Under current USP and FDA monograph standards, sanitizer alcohols must contain less than 0.06% methanol. Anything beyond that threshold is deemed unfit for topical use. Aruba Aloe's flagged lots exceeded that limit several times over. To toxicologists, the finding wasn't just regulatory, it was preventable. One analytical chemist from the University of Puerto Rico put it plainly after reviewing the recall: methanol is an elegant poison, invisible, fast, and patient. You don't smell it, you measure it. That single line says it all, because in the end, real cleanliness isn't what your nose confirms, it's what a laboratory can prove. Number 3. Art Naturals. For years, Art Naturals sold trust in a bottle. Minimalist design, clean fonts, white-green labels that whispered pure. No harsh colors, no loud promises, just that quiet confidence of a product made for people who care. It looked like something you'd find beside a yoga mat or in a Whole Foods aisle ethical conscious safe. Scent-free became its selling point, a kind of purity you could see and feel. But what happens when that very image, the calm bottle, the natural tone, the silence of fragrance, becomes the disguise? In late 2021, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration issued an advisory about Art Naturals scent-free hand sanitizer. Laboratory tests found impurities in several batches, including traces of benzene, a chemical better known for its link to cancer than for cleanliness. The company soon announced a recall, and by April 2022, the list had expanded to cover multiple lots. It wasn't the first recall of the sanitizer boom, but it hit differently. This was a brand that built its entire identity on trust, vegan formulas, cruelty-free slogans, images of green leaves, and human kindness. Consumers didn't just buy a sanitizer, they bought a belief. They thought they were doing the right thing for themselves, for the planet, for their families. And that's what made it sting. Because when the recall notice came, it felt personal. For weeks, online forums filled with confusion and disbelief. Is this real? One user asked under a photo of her half-used bottle. I thought they were the safe ones. People scrolled through batch codes searching for numbers they never noticed before. Others admitted they had stocked up during the pandemic, cartons and closets backups for travel, all now sitting under a cloud of uncertainty. Under that calm design lay a quiet contradiction. The label said scent-free, but inside the chemistry told another story. Benzene isn't added intentionally. It sneaks in through impurity loops and alcohol sourcing when ethanol purification fails or storage tanks are reused without full solvent clearance. Yet the problem wasn't just the impurity itself. It was the assumption that the brand's image was protection enough. The Art Naturals episode exposed something deeper than a contamination flaw. It revealed how modern marketing has turned virtue into packaging, how the language of ethics can dull our instinct for caution. We've been trained to see green labels as guardians of good. Natural plant-based eco-words that used to describe values now function as camouflage. As news spread, disappointment gave way to reflection. What do we really buy when we buy clean a chemical standard or a feeling? The truth is, most of us never read ingredient lists. We read the story. And for years, Art Naturals told one of the best ones, gentle, pure, transparent. The irony is that even transparency can blur if light isn't shown from the right angle. When customers reached out for explanations, responses were brief: a recall link, a statement of apology, reassurances of new testing. But trust doesn't return with a hyperlink. It's earned back molecule by molecule, shipment by shipment. A woman named Teresa from Oregon wrote in a review shortly after the recall went public, "I bought it because it felt trustworthy, simple, no perfume, no gimmicks. I even kept one in my church bag. But now every time I use sanitizer, I still smell that same emptiness, clean, but not safe." That line stayed with many who read it. Because it captured something more than a product failure, it spoke to a collective fatigue, a sense that even honesty needs auditing now. Maybe that's the quiet tragedy of this age of clean beauty. We learned to fear chemicals but forgot to question comfort. And in that gap between image and integrity, trust slowly evaporated, just like the sanitizer itself. Number 4. Best brands. Disney-themed sanitizers. I remember almost buying one of those bottles. It was hanging near the checkout line, a little Mickey Mouse sanitizer, bright blue with a smiling cartoon face. It looked harmless, cheerful, the kind of thing you'd clip onto a child's backpack or slip into your purse without a second thought. I even turned it over once, reading the words "safe for everyday use." For a moment, I believed it. Back then, sanitizer had become more than just hygiene. It was reassurance, a small act of care in a world that felt unpredictable. Parents bought them by the handful. Teachers kept extras in their desks. Grandparents mailed them in care packages to their families. It wasn't about fear. It was about love disguised as practicality. Then came the recall. In April 2022, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration announced that Best Brands Consumer Products, the company behind those Disney-themed sanitizers, was pulling 2 versions off the market. The Mandalorian edition contained benzene, and the Mickey Mouse one contained methanol. Both chemicals never meant to touch skin, let alone the hands of children. The irony was almost unbearable. Bottles designed to look like comfort had become carriers of risk. But I didn't feel anger when I read the report. I felt something quieter, the sting of recognition. Because I understood why people bought them. I almost did too. We live in a time where the line between safety and marketing has blurred so seamlessly that it takes effort to see it. The label says gentle. The color says trust me. And our hearts, already tired from years of uncertainty, just want to believe it's true. I thought about the parent standing in a store aisle, scanning a wall of sanitizers and reaching for the one with a cartoon their child loves, not because of brand loyalty, but because it feels human. Because in a world of risk, choosing a smile feels like choosing safety. Behind that design, though, was a different story. Best Brands wasn't a pharmaceutical company. It was a mass producer of novelty goods licensed to use Disney's imagery. The bottles were bright, the margin slim, the oversight minimal. Somewhere in that long global chain, from alcohol supplier to bottling plant, corners were cut. And yet the people who trusted it weren't wrong to trust. They were simply doing what we've all been trained to do: seek comfort through purchase. When I first saw the recall photo rows of those tiny bottles laid out like evidence, I felt something I couldn't quite name. Sadness, maybe. Not just for the mistake, but for the pattern it revealed. We've built a world where care is commercialized, where protection comes in branded packaging, and where innocence can be printed on a label for 99 cents. A friend of mine, a mother of 2, told me later I didn't buy it because it was Disney. I bought it because I wanted my kids to feel safe. That sentence has stayed with me ever since. Because that's what this really is. Not a story of consumer gullibility, but of tenderness. People wanted to protect their families, and companies knew how to speak to that need. The fault lies not in the act of trust, but in how the market learned to monetize it. So when I look back on that day, the bottle, the smile, the impulse to buy, I don't feel shame anymore. I feel understanding. We didn't fail by trusting. We were simply too human in a marketplace that knows exactly how to use that. And maybe that's the hardest truth to accept. Sometimes what looks like care is just commerce dressed up with a cartoon smile. Number 5. Bloomin', 4E. At the height of the pandemic, the world wasn't asking for perfection, just product. Hospitals were desperate. Shelves were empty. People stood in lines that looped around parking lots for a single bottle of sanitizer. Factories from Texas to Tijuana ran 24 hours a day, producing whatever they could, however they could. And what came off the line wasn't always what it claimed to be. In July 2020, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration issued one of the largest recalls in its modern history, dozens of Bloomin' Assured and Medisa hand sanitizers, all produced by 4E Brands North America, after laboratory tests found methanol contamination. Not trace amounts, but measurable levels high enough to cause blindness, nerve damage, or even death with prolonged exposure. The warning spread quickly, but the products had already traveled far. Millions of bottles were on store racks and warehouses and in the hands of families who believed they were buying protection. For months before the recall, Bloomin' had been everywhere in grocery aisles, gas stations, pharmacies, even dollar stores. Its packaging looked professional, sleek, slightly upscale. The label said, "Made in Mexico, a quiet sign of global partnership." What few realized was that behind those simple bottles stood a system pushed past its limits. Ethanol, the heart of sanitizer, had become a global currency overnight. Every distillery from whiskey makers to perfume plants was retooled to produce it. Prices soared, supply chains snapped. Companies fought over shipping containers. In that chaos, industrial methanol slipped into production lines as a cheaper substitute or through shared storage tanks not meant for medical-grade alcohol. Some facilities had no prior experience with pharmaceutical standards. They were simply told to deliver volume fast. Inside those plants, safety officers warned about testing delays, missing purity certificates, incomplete filtration. But deadlines shouted louder. Trucks were waiting, contracts were signed, and the world outside was still washing its hands raw. It was a race against fear, and fear paid overtime. By midsummer, regulators were drowning in paperwork. Each day brought new complaints, new lab results, new names added to the do not use list. Bloomin' became the face of a wider outbreak, a case study in what happens when urgency outpaces control. The FDA banned imports from several facilities, but shipments had already crossed borders. Even after the recall, counterfeit and leftover bottles resurfaced online for months, sold through discount platforms to unsuspecting buyers. For many consumers, Bloomin' wasn't a villain. It was a symbol of good intention betrayed by speed. Most people didn't know methanol from ethanol. They only knew the smell of alcohol and the sense of relief that came with it. When they pressed the pump, they thought they were protecting their families. The fault wasn't trust. It was the impossible math of demand and time. Industry experts later called it the methanol wave, a collapse not of chemistry, but of coordination. Oversight bodies lacked staff. Importers skipped verification steps. And global shipping turned traceability into a guessing game. The system that promised safety was in truth running on borrowed certainty. Standing back now, it's hard not to see Bloomin' as more than a recall. It was a mirror reflecting how fragile our definitions of safe can become when the world is in panic mode. The lesson didn't lie in one company's failure, but in a collective blind spot, believing that urgency justifies everything. We wanted speed. We got it. But safety built on deadlines can never outlast the crisis that created it. And somewhere in that quiet aftermath, empty shelves, silent factories, unsold pallets, the hum of those machines still lingers, reminding us how easily care turns mechanical when the world forgets to slow down. The story could have ended there in exhaustion, recalls, and lessons written in fine print. But beyond the factories and the fear, another aisle still glows quietly under grocery lights. A few brands never rushed, never cut corners, never traded patience for profit. Their bottles sit humbly at the end of the shelf, not the cheapest, not the loudest, just honest. And for many of us who've lost faith in the word clean, that small glow feels like redemption. In fact, safety was never about how fast we made things, it was about how carefully we chose them. Number 6, Purell. Amid thousands of recalls and rebrands, one name stayed steady on the shelf: Purell. While competitors scrambled to retool formulas or explain supply errors, Purell bottles stood exactly where they'd always been. Hospital counters, classroom sinks, office desks, and kitchen drawers. The same transparent bottle, the same blue label, the same faint clinical scent that signaled not luxury but reliability. There's a reason for that. Purell's parent company, Gojo Industries, didn't enter the sanitizer boom as an opportunist. They built it. For more than 70 years, Gojo has specialized in hygiene systems for medical and industrial environments, a discipline that most brands only discovered after demand exploded. So when the world turned desperate in 2020, they didn't need to improvise. Their formula was already compliant, tested, and trusted. Throughout the pandemic, Purell's advanced hand sanitizer line held a steady 70% ethyl alcohol, verified through FDA listings and Daily Med disclosures. There were no contamination recalls, no methanol substitutions, no emergency reformulations. The only FDA notice Purell ever received was a marketing warning in early 2020, not about safety, but about how confidently they described their virus protection claims. It was a lesson in communication, not chemistry. In an era when every bottle shouted new formula, Purell simply didn't change. And that quiet consistency became its loudest statement. You could walk into any pharmacy and still find the same texture, quick to evaporate, faintly sticky for a second, then gone. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. Hospitals kept ordering it by the crate because the alcohol percentage wasn't a slogan. It was a specification checked batch by batch. Unlike flashier brands that outsourced production, Gojo maintained tight control over its supply chain, sourcing US-made ethanol and performing in-house microbial tests on every lot. The company's factories ran under pharmaceutical-grade good manufacturing practices long before regulators required them. That's not marketing polish, that's infrastructure. And it shows. When FDA investigators compared sanitizer batches during the methanol wave, Purell's internal testing logs were cited as a model of transparency, traceable ingredients, verifiable safety data, and clear alcohol proofs. Every stage had paperwork, every claim had a record. It's not dramatic, but it's how safety endures. In practice, what Purell offers isn't just sanitizer. It's certainty in motion, the quiet knowledge that the thing you use every day will never surprise you. After years of headlines about contaminated gels, mislabeled imports, and cheap imitations, that certainty feels almost rare. Maybe that's why so many people never stopped buying it even when cheaper options appeared. They weren't paying for packaging, they were paying for peace of mind. For many healthcare workers, the sight of that square bottle under fluorescent light meant something simple. This one is safe. And that kind of trust isn't built overnight. It's earned through boring repetition, the kind of reliability that doesn't make news precisely because it doesn't have to. Looking back now, Purell's story feels almost old-fashioned. A reminder that safety isn't innovation, it's discipline. The company didn't chase trends, didn't code its bottle in buzzwords, didn't trade ethics for convenience. It just kept doing what worked. In a world where so many brands tried to redefine, clean Purell quietly kept it literal. 70% ethanol, transparent bottle, clear conscience. Sometimes the truest form of safety isn't the one that promises the most. It's the one that never stopped earning your trust. Number 7, everyone hand sanitizer. If Purell kept the system steady, everyone reminded us that ethics could still be personal. Long before the pandemic turned sanitizer into a survival item, EO Products, a small family-run company from Marin County, California, was already making it not as a quick business, but as part of a lifestyle rooted in mindfulness. Founded in the mid-1990s by Brad and Susan Black, EO started with a single goal to make products that people could feel good about using every day. No secrets, no shortcuts, and no ingredients they wouldn't use on their own children. When the first bottles of Everyone Hand Sanitizer appeared in natural grocery stores around 2012, they looked simple, soft pastel labels, lowercase fonts, and a name that said everything everyone. It wasn't a marketing gimmick. It was a statement that cleanliness shouldn't be a privilege or a panic purchase, but something accessible, gentle, and honest. The company's philosophy is almost old-fashioned in its patience. Every bottle is made in their small San Rafael facility, where batches are still logged by hand and ingredients are locally sourced whenever possible. The alcohol they use non-GMO ethyl alcohol derived from organic sugarcane meets pharmaceutical standards. There's no methanol, no hidden fragrance chemicals, and no filler solvents. Even the bottles are made from 100% post-consumer recycled plastic. And unlike most brands that tout green only as a color palette, EO holds a certified B Corporation status, a public commitment to transparency, fair labor, and environmental responsibility. When the pandemic hit, orders for everyone hand sanitizer spiked more than tenfold. Many small producers folded under that pressure, but EO refused to outsource. They simply expanded their factory, running day and night while keeping every production log intact. In those months when headlines were filled with recalls and contamination alerts, everyone stayed on the FDA's clean list. No recalls, no advisories, no scandals. Customer feedback reflected that trust. Reviews flooded in not for luxury, but for relief. Finally, a sanitizer that doesn't smell harsh. It feels like lotion, not hospital gel. I can use it on my kids' hands without worrying. The formula's mix of organic alcohol, glycerin, and essential oils, lavender, peppermint, or coconut lemon, made it pleasant instead of punishing. People described it as human, a small comfort that fit quietly into daily life. And despite the care in sourcing and certification, the price never soared. A 2-ounce bottle costs around $3 to $4, comparable to supermarket brands. For EO, affordability isn't a slogan, it's part of the ethic. Clean shouldn't be expensive, co-founder Susan Black once said. It should just be clean. That philosophy might sound simple, but in today's marketplace, it's radical. When most companies chase volume or viral campaigns, EO keeps its distance from the noise. They don't sponsor influencers or paint words like pure in oversized letters. Instead, they publish their full ingredient list online, invite third-party audits, and talk about sustainability with the same steadiness they apply to production. In a way, everyone isn't just a brand name. It's a quiet promise that real safety can still come from sincerity. No sterile marketing, no hidden chemicals, no false urgency, just a company that believes clean still means what it used to. So while many brands race to regain our trust, everyone never lost it. Because sometimes the most reliable protection doesn't come from a corporation, it comes from people who still sign every bottle themselves. In the end, this isn't just a story about sanitizer, it's a story about awareness. Before we clean our hands with a qualified sanitizer, maybe we should first clean our minds from the outer mess. The fear, the noise, the endless sales, they've all blurred what safety truly means. We've learned that danger doesn't always come from what we touch, but from what we trust too quickly. The good news is awareness itself is protection. Once you start reading labels, questioning claims, and choosing with intention, you've already stepped out of the crowd. And if we can bring that clarity back to our homes, our choices, and our hearts, then real safety has already begun. Because in the end, the cleanest hands are the ones guided by a clear mind.
This video does not promote division within the United States or encourage litigation. All content is presented for the purpose of exploration, analysis, and fostering discussion based on current events, public sentiment, and social trends. We fully respect the United States Constitution and all federal regulations. If today analysis made you think, drop a comment so we can keep the conversations going. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you will never miss our next independent deep dive.